Well, good morning, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure to be able to actually ask a lot of questions to the guy who spoke last night. And I'm David Ewing, Duncan, journalist, entrepreneur. I write for Wired, New York Times, Vanity Fair, several books. Worked with George. I don't know, how many articles have we done? Way too many, probably. But I've followed his career, 15 years plus. And I got to tell you, one of the exciting things that happens to me each quarter or so is I go and I visit George in his office at Harvard. And we sit in his office and we just sort of riff, and I hear what George is thinking about. And as you could see from last night, this guy thinks about a lot of stuff. He's a very busy guy. In fact, I think he still has one of the largest labs at Harvard, if not anywhere. And one of the extraordinary things, if you ever get an opportunity to go there, and George loves visitors, is to just walk through the lab. And you're kind of really, this is the future in review. We talk a lot about the future here, but you seldom see the future just laid out bench by bench. You're walking by, there's xenotransplants over here, there's gene editing over here, there's other aspects of synthetic biology. He's into computing and AI. And it's just one thing after another. So, and you got that last night, as he was covering a dizzying number of topics. But George, what I want to start with is, we got a lot of the detail last night, but what is the big vision? What is it that you're setting out to accomplish?
I was afraid that we were too superficial last night. So, it's hard to lay out a big vision without sounding arrogant, I guess. But
go for it. Just indulge us. Yes, right?
No, I think we all want to save the planet, to cure poverty, to eliminate disease, and these things are somewhat interconnected. Set up education so that people can know their options, to deal with the ethics. The difference is that we're in a position where, through planning and chance and just aggregation, there's a positive feedback loop, where the first positive feedback loop is the biotech feedback loop that results in a lot of resources funneling into Boston. And then another one that involves MIT and Harvard, and the best people kind of see that beacon from far away and they come. Whether or not the government wants them to come, they nevertheless find their way to Harvard and MIT. And then the third one is my own lab, which has a kind of a beacon of publications and patents and startup companies. So, and then to some extent, you can now take some of these things that would cost billions or never happen, or you never think they were possible, and suddenly we can do them on a shoestring budget. And I kind of have an obsession with bringing the price down. So, those are some of the themes. It would take a while to expand on those, but basically it's solving multiple problems creatively enough that you don't need government handouts, although we certainly benefit from the occasional grant.
Okay, that was still a little bit of detail here. I want to really push you on this. I know.
I'm not warming up to the detail part, but okay.
So I just wrote a book called Talking to Robots, and George is in it. Yeah. And I ask people like George and a lot of other really fascinating people about the future. And in that particular case, it was, what kind of robot or AI system would you like to meet in the future or be afraid of meeting? And people came up with crazy things. You came up with what we called Homosyntheticus in the book, which is basically taking all of these technologies you're working on and creating a future version of yourself. And you didn't want to go digital, for instance, which that chapter is partly about, people that want to download their brains, become robots. So why, tell me.
It's not so much that I didn't personally want to go digital, it's that I have a gut instinct that as we go forward, we're going to go more and more molecular and less the current Silicon von Neumann digital version. Now I can't prove that. I can't provide much evidence, but some of the logic is that the kind of computing that we don't do, humans, like memorizing the internet and playing Go really well and so forth.
You mean we humans?
Yeah, humans are not particularly good at those things, and then we get amazed whenever a human is, and we make them a chess grandmaster and say, isn't he wonderfully machine-like? It shouldn't be surprising machines are good at that. But the things that we really revere, rather than just awarding championships, is thinking out of the box, making positive impact on society, things like that. Computers aren't there yet. And so we do that with a kilogram of mass in our brain that uses 20 watts of power. And we do pretty well at Go and Jeopardy against a 200 kilowatt machine that has some unfair lookup advantages. It's like they've got the open book, we don't. Anyway, but the other reason that I think is even more important is that where Moore's law is taking us is from 40 nanometers down to maybe 10 nanometers or so. But biology is already at sub-nanometer and has been there for billions of years. And even though it's not engineering, it has the appearance of engineering, it has trial and error. So we're atomically precise already, and we'll get even better at it. So I think our brains constantly reconfigure the hardware as well as the software. And there's no particular reason why they couldn't get faster. They're already pretty cheap. You basically feed us food and we compute. So anyway, that's part of the reason I was voting for bio or hybrid. I think we are definitely already hybrid. So, but there's an awful lot we can do with atomically precise biological systems for computing.
So with all the systems you were describing last night and you were working on, what will that future where do you think that will go? What will it look like? What technologies will come to bear?
Well, I mean, certain things are clearly hybrid. I mean, in addition to some of the ones I already listed, like going into space and just going in a jet, going faster, we might as well do that with big iron, rather than trying to make a biological component that can do that. Now, we might manufacture those things biologically, and they might have, it's just like a shell is an inorganic thing that we make biologically. But again, if we want to make an atomically precise rocket, biology is the way to go. But nevertheless, it will look and feel like physics and chemistry rather than biology.
Have you thought much about what it would be like, I'm sure you have, to actually be that person? I mean, what if some of these things or everything you're doing actually works? The gene editing, the gene writing, on and on, xenotransplants. What would it feel like to be that person, or can we even conceive of that?
Yeah, I mean, some people get worked up about, and rightly so. I mean, we should get worked up and cautious and worry about every new technology, but they get especially concerned about germline. But when you're talking about you and me, that's not germline, that's changing our soma. And we already do that extensively, with our hybrid devices and our drugs and so forth. And what it will probably feel like is you hopefully will feel healthier and healthier every day. You'll have fewer acute and chronic diseases, and hopefully it will be available inexpensively worldwide. But that will be part of what it feels like. It's hard to imagine you have parts of your day or parts of your year where you feel a lot more alert, you're just on fire. Imagine that that's your average point, and then there's something above that. What is that?
No.
Or reflecting on, being better at reflecting as well as being on fire. Both of those that you can turn on and off.
I mean, we're talking about spikes in intelligence, or we're stronger. We worked on a story last year on you mentioned it last night, but this idea of recoding DNA and writing the DNA for a cell or for even a person, but actually improving on it. And so, how much will we improve? I mean, everybody talks about intelligence, and I know that that's still almost a black box at this point, but are we talking about that as well?
I mean, most of the things that people talk about, like at the first pass, are cosmetic, and we can already do them with cosmetics. It's not that big a deal. Or their strength and speed, and we can already do those in ways that don't require biology. So what's left is being healthy, aging reversal, and intelligence. Intelligence is one that people find most counterintuitive. We're willing to bestow it on. I think part of the reason we're so excited about AI is that we can do experiments that we can't do on people, or so far don't choose to do on people. But when we can start doing experiments on ourselves, that will be considered a little more ethical than doing it on our kids or our strangers. But the thing is, we shouldn't be doing it, if there's something we're unwilling to do to ourselves, we shouldn't be doing it on other intelligent beings, even if they come from the von Neumann silicon universe. And if they get good enough, they're going to be more intelligent than many humans that have human rights. There are people that are in comas, people that are intellectually challenged from birth, etc. We already have machines that are more have better general intelligence than those people.
Okay. So let's talk about the ethics of all this for a second. Yeah. I mean, you occasionally get in, and I don't know, they're not huge controversies, but you do get, because you like to push the envelope a little bit. I mean, where are we ethically with, say, what you were just discussing? Actually testing, say, gene editing. We're doing it in a very minimal way right now, very careful. Yeah. How are we going fast enough with something like that, or what are the ethical quandaries there?
I think generally speed is not the issue. When you're in exponential technologies and you're part of the exponential where people notice it, the early part of the exponential, nobody notices it. We are at the point where people definitely notice it. Speed is not really the issue. Caution is an issue, checking all the boxes. It's like getting ready to take off. You want to make sure that all systems are go. So I think that's more critical. I think even for computing, there seems to be a race for speed, like who can do the Wall Street trades in microseconds. But other than that, again, it's like the game of Go. There's these very esoteric things where you can win at a game that you've created. But the big picture, long term, it's who improves the world and the universe. And that we have infinite time. We need to avoid certain bottlenecks, like if we burn the planet or create some pandemic or pandemic is created that we just spread by our constant travel. These are things that could set us back so far that it's hard to recover.
Well, there do seem to be some looming issues like climate change that do have a biological component that maybe would require some speed. But one thing that's always fascinated me, and we've talked about many times before, is this. We have not really crossed that line, even though people have talked about it ad nauseum, between, say, therapeutics and enhancement. Mm-hmm. And, there are drugs people take, like Adderall. I mean, there are literally millions of people that are healthy that take it episodically. It doesn't seem to cause the addiction, but we're not testing it, a drug like that, even though millions of people are using it, not for its indication. When does that become ethical or not ethical to do that, to push over that boundary into actual enhancement?
Well, I would argue that we are enhanced in many ways. Some people draw a line between biological enhancement and the enhancement you get from a jet or a cell phone full of computing capabilities. I don't draw that line, but if you're willing to draw that line, I would say that vaccines are an example of a biological enhancement. Mm-hmm. Then they might draw the line where it's inherited. But I would say vaccines are inherited pretty well too, in the sense that your offspring and your great-grandchildren will have the same situation that you do. So basically, everybody probably to infinity, unless somebody recreates it, will benefit from smallpox being extinct. Soon polio, guinea worm, the growing number of human-specific diseases are becoming extinct. Excuse me. But But everything, in a certain extent, is heritable and addictive. Cell phones. My daughter has one just like mine, and her daughter, who's banned from using screens too much, manages to get screens all day, just by asking the right questions. It's very addictive. It would be very politically, you would be a political loser if you tried to pry them loose. So the fact it's in your germline or your genes, it doesn't make it less reversible. If you can change a G to an A, you can change an A to a G. It's not that big a deal. So I think we need to think of these things, less of this exceptionalism that A, C, G, and T is somehow exceptional relative to zeros and ones. It's
kind of interesting. So comparing like our addictions and the manipulation that happens when we use a phone to manipulating
addictions
DNA.
are not unethical. Addictions that make you less capable of living your life, of enjoying your family, of contributing to your job, those are problematic.
But it's using a technology both to help us and to manipulate us, and it's interesting that you're kind of putting biology under that.
I get paid to do all of my addictions. Yeah, so I'm very addicted to many things.
Yeah. Well, another ethical aspect to this is who gets it. I think there was a little bit of talk about that in the previous panel, but do you worry at all about creating a sort of uber class or a group of people that is going to get these technologies?
I mean, that's definitely one of the themes in my whole life in my lab is bringing down the costs. I mean, I've probably obsessed about it more than anybody. And we have brought down the costs of sequencing and synthesis, reading and writing DNA by 10 million fold. And that may sound like an esoteric little field, but it's growing. I mean, if you can make any material via DNA, then being able to make DNA is greatly enabling. And that philosophy of making anything cheaper by factors of 10 to the 7th, 10 million fold or more, is an attitude. It's something that you can bring again and again to multiple problems. And very often when we were faced with the Genome Project, most of my colleagues said, "Oh, give us $3 billion." And I said, "No, let's spend a fraction of that, getting the price down to less than 1,000, and then we can sequence everybody's genome." In fact, they can afford to pay it for it themselves, so it becomes essentially free at that point.
Yeah. This is where George, in subtle ways, kind of is a bit of a maverick, like the Human Genome Project. He wanted to focus after that on let's do full genomes, even though they were expensive, and has been working on that. And he's an organization, the Personalized Genome Project. But did you mention that last night?
Not really.
Yeah,
no.
It was one of the many things he didn't mention, but and there's several hundred, if not several thousand genomes now. But he did this before anyone else thought of it, and you're PGP1, and I'm number 13, and I think Larry is also in the top 10 of that. By the way, two guys here who get their fingers in everything. I wanted to underscore actually what you were just talking about the storage capacity of DNA, because this is a lot of people here from IT. I'm seeing these storage facilities as they exist now, just stretching off into the horizon. But tell us a little bit more about how that would work.
That came up in the Q&A session. I wasn't in my talk a little bit. And we don't know how it's going to work. We just know that there's a lot of people getting interested in it. Microsoft and Technicolor got interested in it. And there's certainly a lot of money and energy meaning human energy as well as kilowatt hours, and going into conventional storage. But DNA already stores greater than exabytes. So after exabytes, which is 10 to the 18th bytes, is yottabyte, and beyond 10 to the 24th. And DNA stores that and more. It's really a matter of interfacing with it. It doesn't interface well with current computing devices. It doesn't mean it doesn't interface with, it does interface with other things. So there's this gap between silicon and carbon universes. They're each doing high bandwidth, but the bio bandwidth that we hardly notice is much larger already, and we either need to build a conduit between them or make a complete break. I think some people sometimes forget is that we don't have to necessarily interface every previous technology to the new ones. In other words, we didn't have to make jets run on railroad ties necessarily.
No, I love it, and this is another case of kind of thinking differently about biology. And I mean, George has actually encoded a movie, and he mentioned his book last night, into DNA, and it's still quite expensive to, I guess it's not expensive to turn it into DNA, but more expensive to recreate it.
The cheapest thing is making copies. Once you have something in DNA, you can make billions or trillions of copies almost for free. But yeah, writing it and reading it are not competitive with disk drives.
Yeah. We'll take a couple questions in a couple minutes, so I just wanted to give you all a little heads up on that. So getting back to the more practical side of what you do, we're talking about all these amazing technologies and the future of humans, but you have to actually run a lab. I mean, you have to raise money, you have to, I don't know how many people you're managing at any given time. Tell us about how you are able to balance all of that in a practical way. Maybe any tips?
Well, I think probably most people here are better at managing than I am. I'm not, my main skill set is science and engineering, and I hire people that are really good managers to help me out because I'm not that good at it, and I know my limitations. I have about 100 people that work with me at Harvard and the Wyss Institute, about 50 in each. And then it has fuzzy edges because many of the people working with me will spin off companies. So we spun off 16 companies last year alone. And they're very diverse, many different fields, but they're all fields that we have mastered in some sense in our laboratory first, where it's kind of a safe haven where they don't have to raise money. In the Harvard, MIT, Wyss Institute, we're tasked with spending money, not making money, which is a different mindset.
Sounds good to me.
But they learn how to do the entrepreneurial thing, and it's very nurturing environment. The previous generation comes back and tells the new ones, like nice older siblings, how it works out there. So we have a culture that's where it's okay to fail fast, and lots of things going on so that you can benefit from the ones that are succeeding while you're failing. You can get your name on the papers and join the companies that are working. But having that ability to fail is good. Having a combined set of technologies that no one else in the world has access to. Not because we're secretive, we hide it in plain sight, but because we trust it. We know that we just developed it. And so we can collide all these different technologies all at once. So that's one of the reasons that you maintain an interdisciplinary. And I could go on, but.
So just really super quick, you actually, for the first time ever I've seen you talk, you didn't show your full disclosure slide.
Yeah.
And it's probably because you got too many, it's already packed.
Busy, yeah.
So just real quickly,
off, yeah.
we're running a little bit out of time here, but I did want to ask you your philosophy in, your fingers are in everything, including some competing. I mean, you're one of the few people I know that sit on advisory boards or even boards or co-founders of competing companies.
Yes.
What is your philosophy behind that?
Well, they're usually not directly competing. They have. If you look at, they're radically different, but they have the same goal, maybe.
Okay.
And it just opened that I'm doing that. I don't tell them each other's secrets, but if I see a synergy, then I will say, you guys should talk. It is unusual to have that level of non-exclusivity, but I think I reevaluate it, and it seems to continue to work. So.
And that's a way to actually make the science you're doing in your lab potentially.
We want to get it out into the world rather than just publish it. I
think we have a question over here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mike, the answer to my question may be already well said by you in multiple ways, but I want to ask you this simple question. Aldous Huxley depicted the dystopia in his book Brave New World. I'm sure you have read it, and in which eugenics has been applied to this gene technology and creates very authoritarian world. How technically close are we to such a dystopia? Probably not in the United States, but in a place like China.
Right. So I think the key word you had there was authoritarian. So the modern genetics is not eugenics in the sense that the problem with eugenics, and this was not a World War II thing, it predated and postdated. It went from the 1920s to the 1970s in the United States. The United States was one of the key places that practiced it. It was that the government would intervene and would sterilize people without their permission, or kill people in some cases. That's obviously dystopian, and we lived it. The new version is that families get guidance from their physicians and from their software or whatever as to what they might want to be able to do, eliminate very serious diseases, and they're not being coerced into doing that. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't become authoritarian, but the kind that we talk about in the United States isn't. What I see in China, so I have a number of companies in China, and I spend a lot of time there, I don't see the authoritarian version of it yet, okay? But it could happen in any country if they see it. People care very much about the one child that they're having, if they're in the one child part of the world, and they want it to be the best child it can be. But we need to stay alert. It could be that authoritarian doesn't apply to everybody; it just applies to an elite army. That's something to worry about, definitely.
Okay, just really quick. We just have a short.
So we often talk about how technologies, sometimes are neutral. They have positive and negative possibilities depending on how we use it. And so with your fingers in so many technologies, kind of also tying back to the previous talk, what can we do to ensure and maximize the positive aspects of technologies and minimize the negative? Maybe specifically gene editing, but the stuff you do, how can we maximize the benefit?
Well, some of the things I mentioned last night that I won't really repeat is we need to increase the number of white hats over black hats. You need millions of them. You need to have a culture of positivity. You need to address the things that cause people to be nasty or evil. Whether they're we could go into that. Those would be the two big ones, but we can also, the technologies themselves can be protected. And I gave an example where there's particular bottlenecks that you can do surveillance on. The key there is surveillance, and it can be very open. So we can have open source surveillance software that checks every DNA sequence that everybody makes in the whole world. And any attempt to go around that is something that you can monitor. Even if you don't know why they're going around it, the mere fact they're going around it is something that can be monitored. I think we're at the point where we could get United Nations level enthusiasm for this. I've talked to two of the Secretary Generals, and they both they initiated it, this conversation. So I think we first had to pass through the phase where the industry spoke, and the industry is very, almost unanimously in favor of this. And so then the governments speak, and then finally the international. So I could go on about that topic if there were time.
No, it's pretty, really the subject here is human nature.
Yeah.
And the spectrum, we can be incredibly noble and good. We can also be very evil.
Oh.
And that's coming up more and more in meetings like this, which is not a technology problem.
And the problem is we're putting more and more power in the hands of the individual. It used to be that in order to kill a large number of people, the number of people that one person could kill was, you could count them on one hand before they got stopped by the crowd,
Right.
And now, in principle, one person could make their own weapon of mass destruction.
Okay, I guess we're a little over here, but thank you so much, George.
Thank you.